And our next guest has done a lot of work exposing that. You know, I want to cover the waterfront with him today. You can disagree with some of their solutions. And, you know, the Washington Post has called them extremely right-wing. Other media has called them Marxist. I really think the best way to describe them is complex. And I want to get Jeff Steinberg's own view on themselves. But we had Lyndon LaRouche on last week, so why not have Jeff Steinberg on this week? He's been the director of counterintelligence for News Weekly magazine, EIR, founded by Lyndon LaRouche in '77. He's an investigative journalist with over 25 years. Steinberg has written and presented lectures on subjects ranging from who runs the international dope and weapons cartels. And over the years, I've just found out their analysis is spot on. To whom is behind the cover-up of Princess Diana's murder, and most recently, who authored 9/11. He also has an in-depth knowledge of the cover-up of President John F. Kennedy's assassination. I want to talk about all of this. And developed extensive knowledge on the inner workings of the Justice Department, FBI, and DEA. In recent years, Steinberg has directed a number of special investigative projects for EIR, resulting in a series of feature packages on subjects such as the coming fall of the House of Windsor, would President Bob Dole, well, it just goes on from there, over some of his famous treatises. He broke down Zbigniew Brzezinski and September 11th. LaRouchePAC.com or LaRouchePub.com are the websites. And I want to cover the waterfront here with Jeffrey Steinberg. But Jeff, first, in 2002, as you know, over 1,000 pages of IMF World Bank documents got released the week after Nobel Prize winner Joseph Stiglitz left. He says he didn't release them, wink, wink. And Greg Palast put them out, of course. And in there, they admit the 100-point-plus plan was 112 points of how they go in, buy off politicians, get them in debt, have them sign over the nation's real estate and infrastructure. Then the corrupt dictator leaves. They implode the country, cause rioting, bring in austerity, which causes more rioting, more austerity, selling off the infrastructure. The country never gets out of debt. It's all fraudulent. But that now they were going to do it to the first world nations, and now they've done it. And admittedly, most of the debt in Iceland, in Ireland, in Greece, in Portugal is not owed by the people. On record, in most cases, over 90%, some it's down in the low 80s, is owed in Ponzi schemes, in derivatives, as you know, the banksters created, the big six mega banks, with the Queen of England and the Netherlands and the Rothschilds and Rockefellers sitting high atop it openly. And how painful is it for you to know this for 30-plus years, to speak about it, write about it, to now watching it all come to a head as they globally conquer everyone out of their fraud, out of their Ponzi schemes, calling for a Bank of the World to pay our carbon and VAT taxes to, and to see them implode countries, literally shut off the social services, toilet paper in government buildings in New York, you know, all of this, knowing that it's a black hole of debt designed to reduce us to absolute slaves. And now it's in the news today. Financial Times of London, you name it. It's up at drudgereport.com, Infowars.com as well. It's all up there today where they say, oh, guess what? We need another bailout now or Europe will collapse. And then you give them another bailout and then it'll collapse, and another and another and another. And the same threats we saw here 3 years ago when Henry Paulson threatened martial law, they did the same thing in Europe. Tanks in the streets, blood, martial law. Jeffrey Steinberg, what is going on here? When is this going to end?
It's going to end when the Ponzi scheme is burst, when an alternative policy is put in place. And I think that we're a lot closer to accomplishing that, particularly here in the United States, than a lot of people think. Look, you put the fundamental issue on the table. For decades and decades, we cataloged and documented the absolute genocidal looting of the developing sector, whether it's Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, exactly what you said, creating a debt bubble, going for asset stripping, depriving the countries of their basic livelihood, resulting in massive population reduction, all on their agenda. Now they're trying to do it in the first world. They're trying to do it in Europe, and of course they're trying to do it here in the United States with the policies that really began with when, particularly when Greenspan came in as chairman of the Fed, and on behalf of J.P. Morgan, broke up the whole Glass-Steagall system that had hamstrung the banks from looting the savings of households and wiping out any kind of credit for investment in the real economy. So now we're at the point where in the House of Representatives, you have a Glass-Steagall reinstatement bill before the legislature. It's H.R. 1489. It's got about 20 co-sponsors now, and our perspective is to overwhelm the White House by having the majority of members of the House of Representatives co-sponsoring the bill to where people like Barney Frank can't dodge the bullet and prevent it from coming up to a debate and vote on the floor of the House. Same thing in the Senate. We're expecting any day now a Senate version pretty much identical to the captor bill. This is a flank to bankrupt Wall Street. This is not just simply a way of reconstituting commercial banking. Like a chargeback of an unauthorized charge on your credit card, we're going to charge back at least $17 trillion in gambling debt accrued by the big Wall Street banks and by some of their European friends, particularly in the Inter-Alpha group of Lord Jacob Rothschild.
Jeffrey, stop right there, because I want you to get into Rothschild and all that in more detail, but I don't want to just glaze over the important things you're saying. They admit that customer service banks, lending banks, private sector banks are disappearing. They're being gobbled up by the regulators, run by the big six banks who put their people into all the main positions of power. They admit that the customer service level of banks and actual lending for the economy is shutting down all over the world, despite them being flush with banker bailouts, and that they're laying people off at banks everywhere. I mean, this is a planned implosion. This is economic genocide.
That's exactly right. And we're going to make sure that it doesn't succeed. And that's the fight that we're in right now. You've got a mood in the country where there is an absolute sense of betrayal by this president, by Wall Street. And we've been at public meetings all over the United States. The 4th of July recess was a perfect opportunity. The Progressive Caucus had a series of policy forums. We were in Milwaukee and Detroit and Harlem and New York City. And when our people got up, our candidates in particular, and raised the issue of Glass-Steagall and bankrupting Wall Street and reconstituting the viable commercial banks that are needed to protect depositors' savings, to issue credits into the real economy.
Tell us what the people did when you said that when we come back. Jeff Steinberg's our guest. Back to Jeffrey Steinberg. I want to get into a host of other issues to really look at who these people are, but you were getting up to the point of speeches all over the country with your organization, and when you talked about Glass-Steagall, going after the banksters, the response you got.
It was electric. Standing ovation, and in all three instances that I'm referring to, there were several members of Congress on the podium who were co-sponsors, including in one instance Marcy Kaptur herself, and there were other members of Congress who had not yet signed on, and universally every one of them, when they saw the reaction, said, count me in, I'm on board, and we're holding their feet to the fire. We're going to see what happens by the middle of this week. We expect to see all of those people now on as signatories. We're going for the jugular against Wall Street at a moment when they are most vulnerable. They're hated by the American people. The bailout is despised. Geithner is in there knowing that another $1 trillion bailout is going to be needed to save the big six before the end of this year, and there's no political way that that's going to be tolerated. In Europe, you've got literally nonstop rioting in the streets of Athens because people are just completely fed up with the sellout of their government and the fact that Maastricht and the Lisbon Treaty is a banker's dictatorship straitjacket on them. This is not going to go down in Europe, but in particular in the United States, We have a history, we have a constitution, and we have a remedy for solving this problem. We're going to basically take that $17 trillion in bailout money and charge it back to the brokerage houses and insurance companies and reestablish a full wall of separation so that commercial banks do what they're supposed to do. Take deposits and issue loans to businesses, home loans for mortgages, and let these gamblers basically choke to death on their own bad debt.
Well, what is their end-game plan? We've seen what they've done in the third world, but attempting this in the West, they've gotten away with it so far while imploding society. I mean, all the indicators, all the data is coming in on the societal meters and control panel here. The instrumentation shows we are in a serious crisis, and they really think they're just going to run implosion after implosion, looting and stripping after stripping, with more looting on top, selling us that they're the good guys, and anybody that criticizes the private Federal Reserve is some type of terrorist. That's not going to hold water. I mean, more and more the hue and cry is, get out the guillotines.
That's right. Remember the attitude of Percy Shelley. He said, we are many, they are few. He was talking about the oligarchy, and it's absolutely true at this moment. They selected Obama as their instrument. They intend to try to go for some sort of pretext for dictatorship, but the odds of them succeeding are very slim. The real key question is not whether or not there's going to be a revolt. There is a revolt already, and it's going to get much, much louder and much nastier. The question is, will there be an alternative policy, or will the anger spill over into just uncontrolled chaos, in which case their agenda, as you mentioned earlier, of massive population reduction is what's going to happen? That's the key question. Is there leadership? Is there a policy to bring about an economic recovery to basically cast off this completely illegal parasitical gambling debt from the backs of average citizens? And will we go back to a credit system based on commercial banking, federal credit to be issued through the private banking system for viable projects to create jobs and rebuild our economy, starting with basic infrastructure?
But then meanwhile, the banksters fund a lot of phony libertarian groups, and I see myself as a real constitutionalist / libertarian, but I don't like labels. You know, they're too simplistic. But meanwhile, they finance all this, quote, free market stuff that, oh, you can't finance any public works projects because that's socialism. Well, what is it when you give tens of trillions to offshore banks that don't pay taxes? I mean, I'm against socialism, but I mean, if you're going to have government projects, then it should be the people. But then I get back to, if we're going to have bailout money, or we're going to print money, at least issue it to small businesses. How about that? How about just have lending? How about the currency be controlled by the government and the Congress as it's supposed to, as the founder said? Stay there. Going back to Jeff Steinberg, I want to shift gears now out of what's happening economically after we cover one more quadrant, because I got, I want to pick your brain on so much more dealing with their agenda. I remember 15, 16 years ago when I was already on air, folks mailing me executive intelligence review, and I'd already done a lot of research and found your analysis to be accurate, but even going deeper. And now, 16 years later, I know that it's even worse than you guys even report. This is so off the chart, where they admit in published books and documents that the health care is to deny you care and train you and kill you. And, oh, you don't need glasses or eye surgery. How about a cane? Or we're not going to treat that brain tumor. Or we're not going to, I mean, this is, and then they cloak it and call it liberal. Then they have fake Republicans like Mitt Romney endorsing carbon taxes and global warming, and who wrote the health care bill in Massachusetts as the model. And it shows how they control both parties. What is their global goal if they're not stopped? What will they do? What is their exit strategy from command destruction, from a post-industrial world, as Maurice Strong and the head of NASA Space Center, Goddard Center says, Al Gore, Ted Turner, just a few months ago in Cancun, Mexico, saying one-child policy, global tyranny, endorsing infanticide. I mean, People expect Hitler with a mustache on. That was in the 30s and 40s, folks. It's shown up different this time, and because it masquerades with a lisping NPR affectation, people go, well, you're whispering at me. I'm just going to lay down and you can run over me. Who are these people? What is their end game? What's going to happen in Europe now? They're gearing up for, obviously, a giant new war as a smokescreen. This is insanity.
Well, look, take it from the top. Just take a look at the British royal consort, Prince Philip, who's one of the founders of the World Wildlife Fund back in 1960, 61. He just says it outright: reduce world's population by 80%. There's a top economic advisor to the German Chancellor Angela Merkel named Schellenhuber, who basically spreads the whole global warming lie and says that the world population, the carrying capacity, is actually reaching the point where it's under 1 billion people. These people reject the most fundamental thing about what it means to be a human being, which is creativity, the ability for scientific discovery to improve the universe. And so for them, they have a utopian fantasy that they can go back to some kind of postmodernist form of feudalism where somehow or other the world population is reduced by 80% by wars, disease, and famine, and somehow or other they will remain unaffected. Bertrand Russell wrote in 1953 that if we could perfect the method for having a Black Death once every generation, and we could determine who lives and who dies in that process, then we would have the kind of world that would be safe and happy place for oligarchs like him. These people ought to go back and read Boccaccio, the Decameron, which was Boccaccio's account of the delusions of the oligarchy in Europe at the time of the 14th century Black Plague, where they also thought that somehow, by bloodline, they were immune to what was going on all around them. And they're not. So there's no question that they are doomed. The question is whether or not the rest of mankind is going to go down with them.
That's right.
Or whether we're going to put together an alternative policy.
That's right. The social engineers, the Anglo-American eugenics proto-Nazis, I wouldn't call them neo, because Hitler, of course, was an extension of that, openly funded by projects. Absolutely, openly funded by the Rockefellers, who fund Bono now, and of course Bill Gates. I mean, he's an open subsidiary of the Gates Foundation. He doesn't pay taxes, but goes around telling you that middle class should have its taxes raised. I mean, these people are nightmares of evil, and I'm glad folks are rioting in Europe whenever Bono shows up. But there's something on top of this, Jeff. This transhumanism, and I don't mean all the flavors of it, but the dominant one, coined by Aldous Huxley's brother Julian Huxley when he wrote in 1951. Hitler has and you can pull this up, folks. Hitler's discredited eugenics because he went too far too fast. We're going to rename it transhumanism and promise that all of this tyranny and genetic engineering and the rest of it will extend life and make us transform. So they sell their takeover, and they sell, and the elite sell the public going back to nature, but really they're delusional. As you know, it's being pushed everywhere now in the transcendent man and the rest of it, that they're going to live forever. Here's the Daily Mail today. Dawn of a new age. The first person to reach 150 is already alive and soon will live to be 1,000, claims scientist Dr. Aubrey de Grey. And then you've got all the rest of these people pushing this. So at the highest level councils of the globalist system, this is what they're obsessed with. Whether it's real or not, they think, like some Ian Fleming book, Moonraker, they're going to kill all of us and then inherit the earth and go up on some Mount Olympus and live forever like Zardoz. I mean, these people are nuts. Please talk about it.
That's exactly right. They are nuts. They have delusions, but I think it's more important to realize that basically this is the essence of the oligarchical system. It's the essence of the system of money power-based empire. You could trace it back to Rome and even to earlier antecedents. You had a phase in which Rome morphed into the Byzantine Empire and then into Venice, and Venice relocated to the Netherlands and to England. What you have is a system that says that there's an oligarchy at the top that rules through the power of money, and that the rest of humanity is basically to live in some kind of form of animal or slave existence. So it's that system that has now reached another one of those breakpoints where the Ponzi scheme has burst and where they are desperately scrambling for a way out of it. You said a few moments ago that that under these kinds of circumstances, they go for war and they go for dictatorship. That's exactly right. We've entered into a new fiscal year as of just a few days ago on July 1st in 47 out of 50 states. All of the states collectively are bankrupt to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. And in order to basically conform to the Constitution and basically solve that indebtedness for the start of the new fiscal year, they've implemented levels of genocidal austerity. And now on top of that, you've got this whole silly debate over the debt ceiling, in which they're using it as an excuse for further slashing medical care, all kinds of things. The American people are looking for an alternative, and we have the alternative clearly in hand. It's before the House. We also know that to achieve the change in policy that's urgently needed at this time, President Obama needs to be removed from office through perfectly legal constitutional means. It's a scandal in my mind that the House of Representatives has not already convened the equivalent of a grand jury into the president's failure to meet the requirements of Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution in this ongoing Libya operation. It's a clear violation not just of the War Powers Act, but of the most fundamental issue within the Constitution, namely the fact that we were not to be a monarchy. Kings were not to have the authority to frivolously go to war. It was given to the Congress precisely because we wanted to make it as difficult as possible to get involved in wars. President Obama believes that under the doctrine of humanitarian intervention, which in UN lingo is now called R2P, responsibility to protect, that he can bypass and rip up the Constitution. That is intolerable.
Well, Jeff, we can see the new model of 1984 tyranny where they call war peace and go around slaughtering everybody, and that's the reason they gave him the Peace Prize, knowing that this was the strategic blueprint. It's all part of the sick joke, rebranding war as peace.
Precisely. So now we've got a situation where many people in the Congress know that the president is in clear violation of the Constitution. So we have an avenue prescribed by the Founding Fathers for removing a president from office if they've committed high crimes and misdemeanors. And there's no doubt that President Obama crossed that threshold. We also have the option of Section 4 of the 25th Amendment, which was enacted in the aftermath of the Kennedy assassination, which laid out precisely how a president may be removed from office with a checks and balances system if he's considered both physically and or mentally unfit to continue to serve. The president's crossed that threshold also. And again, these are issues that are not going to be fought out strictly inside the Beltway because there's a great paucity of members of Congress with the moral guts to act to defend the Constitution. We have a group of 10 members of the House, led by people like Dennis Kucinich, Walter Jones, John Conyers, and others, who filed a federal suit against President Obama for failing to live up to his constitutional obligations. And so the federal court now has this matter before them, and this is what caused the White House to completely freak out and scramble to cover for Obama's flagrant violation of the Constitution.
Well, even Nadler, and of course Ron Paul, but even Nadler, the minion of Obama, came out and said, if this stands, the presidency is now a king. I mean, he used the term emperor, and folks don't understand, this is one of the most pure forms of tyranny. If you go back to crossing the Rubicon with Caesar in whatever it was, 45, 46, I forget, before Christ. In fact, we guys pull up Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon for me. Thanks, I forget the exact year. But the point is that this is so out in the open and so ridiculous. And his lie that it would last days, not weeks, and now the special forces are there. They're preparing the ground troops. The Russians have confirmed what the Israelis have confirmed, that what we first reported a month ago, that it's on cold-bloodedly, always knowing that if they couldn't get rid of Gaddafi, they'd go to ground force, and calling it humanitarian. Now, the corporatist empire, a very dangerous new strategy, and I'd like you to talk to this. Now all they have to do is foment some rebels in the Middle East, North Africa. It's al-Qaeda as usual, same folks they use against the Russians and the Serbs. Have al-Qaeda blow up some police stations, shoot some people, government fights back against it, and then there's a full-on invasion, and you don't even call it a war, and our media now tells us we must support al-Qaeda.
Well, look, let's be very clear. The Constitution, the War Powers Act, the debate that went on around the passage of the Constitution was very clear. Only the Congress has the authority to declare war. And if you go back to the early history of our republic and when we were battling the Barbary pirates, Justice John Marshall of the Supreme Court was very clear that Congress lays down very precisely what the president as commander-in-chief can and cannot do. And the minute that the president crosses the line and goes beyond that, he's slapped down an order to cease and desist. Now, under even just the War Powers Resolution itself, it specifies not only American troop involvement, but if an American commander is involved in a military operation, then that constitutes a requirement of the president to get congressional approval. Who is the commander-in-chief of NATO? It's Admiral Stavridis, who's an American naval four-star. The AfricaCom came out with a report last week that basically proved that the president was in contempt of Congress when he filed a 32-page memo arguing why he didn't have to come to Congress.
For the first time, they've ignored, for the first time, Jeff, as you know, 3 weeks ago, they ignored the Pentagon's own lawyers that said you got to go to Congress. That's
right. And this past week, AFRICOM came out and said that U.S. planes with U.S. pilots have carried out over 800 bombing sorties in Libya since the beginning of hostilities, and that at least 160 of those resulted in bombs being dropped on targets. One of the members of the Senate during the early debate last week was grilling the State Department General Counsel, Harold Koh, who's one of the big George Soros men proposing this humanitarian interventionist doctrine. And one of the senators said, well, by your definition, we could drop an atomic bomb on Tripoli, and as long as no American soldiers are in danger, that doesn't count as a war. So it's preposterous, and Obama should be being impeached today. The first order of business with the reconvening of the House tomorrow afternoon ought to be canceling all other business and convening the House as a grand jury to consider the impeachment of Obama.
You're absolutely...
And that's a serious message that the Congress is listening to the American people and that we want a radical change in policy back to our traditions.
Well, if we don't, the sky is the limit, and more Obama wants to use troops domestically and the TSA against the American people. Jeff, we're going to break, but do you agree that we're also seeing a domestic spy apparatus and now beginning to be turned loose against the population?
Absolutely, and the president would like to go for dictatorship if he can come up with a pretext to get away with it.
I want to come back and get into 9/11, false flag stage terror attacks. I want to get into Obama death care. I was getting into state-sponsored terror, but also because I've seen your reports. I've seen it myself when they're saying it. I've read their books where they say it's for the population reduction. They're going to kill us and how the old deserve to die. And then they count on the public not reading all their writings. And we sit here with horror going, these people aren't liberals or conservatives. These are psychopaths. Jeff Steinberg, how do you deal with this?
Well, the first thing that you've got to do is shed the public light on them. A lot of the things that they say themselves, they say out of the arrogant and false assumption that their words are only being heard and read among a very tight circle of like-minded people. So there's a great deal that's to be said for simply sticking to the intensive historical research to give people a framework for understanding who these people are and what they're doing. And that strengthens the population to take the necessary curative action. You mentioned earlier Adam Smith, and I had to laugh to myself because here was Adam Smith, supposedly the great ideologue of the free market system, but at the time that he wrote, he was working for the largest cartel in the history of mankind, the British East India Company. He taught at the East India Company College, along with people like Jeremy Bentham and James Mill and others. So that is the cornerstone of the liberal ideology that's the poison that has prompted so many people in our own country to forget their responsibilities as citizens of a republic and ignore history. So, warfare has always been the instrument of the oligarchy as a way of keeping populations both reduced in numbers and dumbed down. And, you mentioned the
Jeff, stay there.
Back
in 1 minute. Jeff, stay there. We're talking to the director of counterintelligence, one of the chief writers and researchers at EIR. You can find out more at LaRouchePAC.com or LaRouchePub.com. Jeffrey Steinberg, I want to briefly get your take on DSK and then a few other issues and take calls, but you were finishing up a point as we hit break. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I think the point is just simply that really having an understanding, a grasp of history, and understanding it from the standpoint that there's been a long-running historic fight against this oligarchical faction that permeates the whole history, particularly of Western civilization from Western Europe, the migration into the United States, into North America, was all about getting away from the stranglehold of oligarchy. And the United States, therefore, does have a unique historical mission, a unique history, and our job is to restore that because there's still a gut sense of that moves around in the minds of the American people, and you see it particularly in crisis moments like this.
Well, that was my next point. That was my next question for you, is we see the awakening accelerating, evidenced by just a decade ago. It took 4 to 6 years for a population to wake up to the fact that a Bill Clinton or a George W. Bush was a fraud. They woke up to Obama, the polls showed, in less than a year, and now he's the most unpopular president in modern history and plunging. Now, when the Republicans get in with a Mitt Romney or somebody, and they don't deliver, they're going to be political dog food, fish food in a matter of weeks. And so their little tricks aren't working very well anymore, and soon aren't just going to not work, they're going to blow up in their face. And I'm seeing that on more and more fronts. And so they're desperately coming out, bashing the Constitution everywhere as if it's sexy and trendy. I mean, they're really revealing themselves, and I see it all coming to a head. So what can you say? What can you say about that?
The flip side is that you've got a small but growing group of patriots. We see it in the Congress with things like the bipartisan action to reinstate Glass-Steagall, like the bipartisan suit taken out against the president for violating the Constitution. I think that the top leadership of both of the political parties have shown themselves to be completely bankrupt. That's why you've got a majority of American voters considering themselves to be independent of the two parties.
So what happens when they betray us again?
We have to make sure we win before that. We have a very short time fuse in which to win this Glass-Steagall fight, because that's the way we put the onus back on Wall Street. We pull the plug on their Ponzi scheme, and in many cases, these people ought to be being frog-marched off to jail. But if we win on the Glass-Steagall fight, that will be the end for the Obama presidency, and we'll see a new combination coming into being that's based on people who put country and the survival of future generations above petty partisan politics. That's what I see beginning to happen. That's what the population absolutely wants. They're responding to those politicians who change their stripes and take that position. And, you know, Mr. LaRouche has put forward very clearly the steps that have to be taken in the immediate days and weeks ahead. And I think that the vast majority of Americans are behind it. So I think
all right, let's talk about what happens if we don't change course and stop the Ponzi schemes, because the system admits the Ponzi scheme is meant to gobble up all wealth on the planet. It's hundreds of times all the real wealth on the planet. They're fraud. If we sign on to it, it's like a lead weight of 1 trillion tons around our neck being thrown into the Marianas Trench. We'll be right back with some of your phone calls, some other key issues with Jeff Steinberg. Straight ahead, something you've really looked at, you've really covered, and have done a sterling job. In fact, I read some of your EIRs online, some of the featured articles, not the thick publication itself, the quarterly or monthly, whatever it is. I mean, I know I get them in the mail, but never have time to read those. I read the online stuff. I saw your analysis and other people at your outfit 2.5 years ago when this fight was just starting, with the quotes and what Daschle had written in his book and what Bill Gates was saying, and how the insurance companies had written this to cut off care and to take control from doctors and providers away and let the HMOs, you know, control it. And then I would go actually look it up or buy the book. I did a lot of research. I did some of my own as well, and found not only was it true, it was even worse than you were saying, because there's no way to cover it all. And now Bill Gates has come out and said, yeah, we want to kill grandma to give 10 teachers jobs, selling the false idea that if you have a predatory, cannibalistic economy, that for you to have a job, somebody's got to die, selling this play us off against each other economy. Can you briefly speak to what this healthcare monstrosity really is?
Sure. Well, look, the essence of Obamacare, aside from the overall killer austerity, is the creation of literally a death panel. The independent Payment Advisory Board is to be given life and death decision-making over what medical procedures will be allowed, will be paid for, and which will be basically disallowed. This was what Hitler did in 1939. At the very outset of the Anschluss, Hitler created a euthanasia panel at Tiergarten 4. It was the physical location in Berlin where the offices were. It's identical in every respect to what Obama has created under Berwick and others, so that it's a Nazi policy.
And he beta tested it as early as 35 with handicapped children at government orphanages, and they would send the little fake death certificate to the SS on file.
That's right. In 39, they began it in earnest. They continued the policy for 2 years, and there was a backlash against it even during war in Nazi Germany, and the Catholic Church, among others, pushed back, and they had to basically temporarily walk away from it, but they obviously reinstated it on a grand scale with the concentration camps, the gas chambers, all of the rest of that.
And they had the IBM machines for that, all Rockefeller involved, total scum.
Right, but it started out with death panels, where you had a, quote, independent board of professionals who were using cost analysis to decide who lives and who dies. And that's what we have with Obamacare. Well,
yeah, they had the IBM Hollerith machines for those death panels.
That's right.
Unbelievable. And now IBM again today. For my research, have you looked into Thomas Watson, the big Nazi eugenicist, and how he put a lot of IBM's money into a trust? And that's why IBM is always involved in RFID and tracking and human genome and eugenics, is because literally many of these big foundations, pure mission, these people are obsessed with killing people.
Well, look, you had a meeting in New York City at Rockefeller University about 6-8 months ago, and there was then a follow-on meeting, and the participants were Bill Gates, George Soros, Warren Buffett, and a half a dozen other multi-billionaires who pledged to put all of their, quote, philanthropic money into the most important issue, which for them was population reduction. It's all right there in black and white. So you've got this little wannabe oligarchy group who all made their money in one way or another in speculation and other dirty activity. Soros's big deal is drug legalization and laundering drug money. That's who he is on behalf of the British. So it's a repeat of things that we've seen many times before in history, but now we're seeing it with a real vengeance, and we've got to just make sure these people are crushed before their plans go ahead.
And by the way, at the end of the Times of London article from 2009 in May that you report on, billionaire club and bid to curb overpopulation. And at the end of this article and others, they admit it's a world government to carry out the population reduction. And then you get the Royal Commission from 49, excuse me, that I know you've written about. They said we could industrialize, and actually the third world wouldn't have too many children, even in their view. But instead, we're going to cut off development, let their populations explode, and then have after-the-fact mitigating things to kill them off, like war, famine, diet, injections, and injunctions. So they let you be born and then kill you. I mean, it's these people make Jeffrey Dahmer look like Mother Teresa.
That's the oligarchical system. That's the essence of it.
These people are beyond evil, and we did put that article on screen that you mentioned. Ladies and gentlemen, you cannot make this stuff up. Truth is indeed stranger than fiction. Doug in California, you're on the air with Jeff Steinberg. Go ahead.
Good morning, Jeff, Alex.
Hey.
I'm calling from your favorite place here in California, KSCO land in Santa Cruz.
Oh, I love it.
I really like the connection you've been drawing between the weaponization of water and how it's been used to control, and what I'd like to, and your guest talking about Ponzi schemes, and as you might know, we have one of the biggest agricultural areas in the world here, $4.5 billion, Monterey Bay. It suffers 15, according to Mark Rydson, the worst saltwater intrusion loss in the world through big agra's expropriation of our water supply to export our water supply, or steal our water. I'd like to hear your guest's thoughts on how water might be used and is being used to control us.
Yeah, the takeover of all commodities for artificial scarcity. Jeff Steinberg. Say hi to everybody out there in KSCO land. Beautiful area. If I lived in California, it'd be in Santa Cruz. Thank you so much. I want to say hi to all the listeners of KSCO, like Doris Day, and, of course, the one, the only. Folks, you know him out there as Clint Eastwood. Let's go ahead and get a comment from Jeff Steinberg on that.
Well, look, we've had a complete depletion of the water tables in many, many parts of the country. In other areas, we're getting intensive snows in the winter and rain. We need an effective water management system. It was designed in the 1960s by Parsons Engineering out there in California, called the North American Water and Power Alliance, which would create a modern system of water capture and irrigation through dams and canals, taking about 20% of the Arctic runoff in the spring, funneling it down through the western states of the United States.
Oh, but that's development. You can't have that. That money's got to go to Wall Street so they can fly above our slums in their jets and helicopters.
And not only that, this program would create immediately somewhere in the vicinity of 5 to 9 million productive, good-paying jobs, because this is the largest engineering project that's ever been undertaken in history, and it can be done. You'd create immediate jobs in over 30 states in the country. You'd have a revival of the
But
old
Jeff,
Rust
that's
Belt
the
of
American.
Midwest.
That's the American system. We're the country that had the big projects, the Brooklyn Bridge, the Panama Canal, when the French couldn't do it. That's evil. That's the American. You know what? I want to do 5 more minutes with you on the other side, and we've got to let you go then. And you've been very gracious, but I want to be able to talk to Richard, Wendy, Tim, Aaron, Keith, and others. But in 30 seconds, I'm going to get one more call in. How would you describe the LaRouche organization? Washington Post calls you right-wing. Other media calls you Marxist. What are you really?
Small R Republican and the American system. What you just said in terms of our perspective, that this is a nation that was founded on the basis of a credit system to get away from a monetary oligarchy. If you go all the way back to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, we established something that had no previous history of existence on this planet. A true republic based on a credit system in which it's not a private oligarchy that governments go begging
Credit
to borrow money
empowers the individual. Credit doesn't create a monopoly for the oligarchs that issue the fraudulent instrument.
Precisely.
Precisely. All right, let's jam in one call, get their question. We'll come back and answer it. Richard in California, then Wendy in Hawaii, and others. Richard, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Alex, thank you for talking to me, and I really enjoy your guest. I have a comment and a question for Jeff. Jeff, thanks for everything that you're doing. And here's my comment. I hope that you'll take this very seriously, even though it sounds unusual. But
No, make your comment. We're going to go to break. Go ahead.
Okay. The states are not broke, and they're not states. They're corporations, and they're hiding massive money using the broke charade to take us one step closer to martial law. If that could be exposed, I'm looking for...
You're talking about comprehensive annual financial reports and the fact that we've been induced into debt by fraud. He's saying technically all 50 states are bankrupt within the bailout system if we sign on to the derivatives. But I'll let Jeff Steinberg answer that. Answering Richard's question, he's talking about the comprehensive annual financial reports, the double set of books, the investments of government, water districts, school districts, state governments, federal government agencies versus their budget that we know is only one area. What's your comment on that?
Well, all of that's true. And of course, you know, Wall Street has been doing these various insurance swindles that have looted a number of states and municipalities. But the fundamental point is that immediately after our Constitution was ratified, the country was, for all practical purposes, in debt and bankrupt. And in an agreement that was reached between Hamilton, Washington, Jefferson, Madison, who were already sort of squabbling at that point, it was agreed that the federal government would assume all of the debts of the state so that the federal government could engage in the issuance of credit, converting this debt into an instrument for credit for the development of the economy. And in return, the states would not have the ability to carry forward debt from one year into the next. There's all kinds of tricks that have been done by Wall Street to pervert this system, but the bottom line is that as of July 1st, 47 out of 50 states had to basically have a balanced budget. In other words, they had to come up with cuts, firing police, firing teachers, firing firemen, doing other things.
That's the austerity, and it's because we've agreed to be signed on to the derivatives fraud. So you're saying we're bankrupt when we're signed on to this Ponzi scheme. We've got to unsign from that. Wendy in Hawaii, you're on the air with Jeff Steinberg.
Hello?
Yes, Wendy. Welcome to the airwaves.
Hello. I think I jumped the gun. I saw two headlines. I had to run out to work at 4 a.m. It's like 8:30 in Hawaii now. I just got home. But I think somebody brought this up on your show the other day about the Australian Green Party, Bob Brown. The headline said, AU Green Party leader admits global warming is really all about world government.
No, that's official Green Party in Australia. They say it's an excuse to manage all human activity for world government, and we posted those reports last Friday. I appreciate your call, Wendy. That's just more of this continuity of agenda, this global strategy. What is the carbon tax? Jeff Steinberg.
Carbon taxes. It's literally an attempt to create yet one more Ponzi scheme, literally out of hot air. It's an attempt to basically have a new bubble that will be explicitly attacks on any kind of modernization, any industrialization, any improvement on the conditions of life. And not surprisingly, Al Gore, through his blood and gore brokerage house in London, has tried to corner the market on the creation of this global carbon swaps futures market based out of Chicago and London. It's a complete swindle. It's based on a scientific fraud, and literally it's an attempt to create one more Ponzi scheme to kick the can down the road of this vast financial bubble.
And it's even more evil because they selectively enforce it, just like Obamacare, where all the insiders, the inner coterie of the oligarchs, they don't have to pay the tax. It's incredible.
That's right.
Unbelievable.
But it's not going to happen because increasingly the fraud of global warming, the swindle, is becoming more and more transparently obvious. And what I'd really like to just say and urge all of your listeners, all of your viewers, is that we're in the process of winning this Glass-Steagall fight. And the more people that get in on this and get to their congressmen and hold their feet to the fire to do something that will be vitally in the interests of the entire people of the United States, this is it. And I can guarantee if we get Glass-Steagall presented before the House and the Senate for an up or down vote, Obama is doomed.
Absolutely. That puts a stake in the globalist heart big time. Jeff Steinberg, thank you for joining us. Look forward to speaking to you again in the future.
Excellent.
LaRouchePAC.com. Thank you. Infowars.com is our site.
Welcome back. This is Exopolitics TV, and once again, we're very privileged to have Kevin Annett, who is the Field Secretary of the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State, and who has now been in various countries in Europe in conjunction with the trial and other matters of the International Common Law Court of Justice. Welcome, Kevin, and also welcome Joshua Lemons of Radio Warrior. And so I will turn it over to you all.
Thank you, Alfred.
How's it going, and where are you now in your travels all over Europe, Kevin?
Well, I've actually come back over the water. I'm in the United States right now, working with some groups in Florida, the common law education groups here. But I was in 5 countries in Europe over the last 3 weeks and had some quite amazing experiences.
Wow. So tell me, I heard there was you had an interview. A lot of people have emailed me concerning the, what was his name, Laurent Louis?
That's right. He's the Belgian member of Parliament, Laurent Louis. He's been in the headlines a lot.
Yeah, I know. What did you? How did your interview pan out, and what came up with that?
Well, we met with one of our ICTCCS groups in Belgium. Had a meeting between myself and him and all of his people. And they, of course, are preparing for an election on May 25th, but he was very embroiled in that. But the amazing thing about what he's done, if people don't know, is that he went public and was in the media all over Europe, accusing members of the government of being involved in child trafficking. He also named members of the Dutch royal family and the British royal family in this child trafficking. As a result, he's facing charges. They're attempting to bring him to trial. And he was also being assaulted by police and put in jail illegally. So, I mean, he's clearly being targeted for speaking out, and he's also very interested in the work we're doing. And he's, as part of our meeting, we agreed that we would continue to work very closely together. The only difficulty was the translation problem, because he, of course, didn't speak English, but... you know, we fortunately have translators who are able to, get around that. But I think the important thing is that we're now beginning to see politicians, in the mainstream coming forward to support what we've been doing for years, which is to say, yes, child trafficking and murder is happening at the highest levels of government and churches, all over Europe and America.
Nice. I hear that recently there was a soldier, Vivian Cunningham, an ex-military man from Jamaica that ended up being in the military in the UK, and he was detained and brought into jail for asking questions about the Common Law Court of Justice judgment.
Well, it's quite bizarre, and this is again happening. This is like a repeat of what happened to one of our members in Coventry, England, David Clompans. If people remember, all David was doing was posting up notices describing how Elizabeth Windsor, so-called Queen Elizabeth of England, had been indicted before the Common Law Court case that the verdict came down February 2013, finding her and Pope Benedict and others guilty of not only committing crimes, but covering them up, crimes against children, and her particular role in abducting 10 native children from the Kamloops Indian School, and then these children were never seen again. All of that was described in the evidence that David was posting. They grabbed him, put him in a mental hospital under this notorious law in England, which basically criminalizes dissent. It says if you accuse people in high office of these crimes, you can be categorized as having a mental disorder, and it's called the fixated threat assessment law. And they put David into the mental hospital on that basis. They've done the same thing to Vivian Cunningham.
Now
David,
was Vivian up on the issues that were going on? Was he a part of ITCCS or any of the groups, or he was just asking questions?
Well, here's the story. With David, he was an activist within ITCCS. But Vivian Cunningham was a soldier. He's a black Jamaican who had been a member of the British Army for a number of years. He enlisted in the Irish Guards, which is a fairly elite regiment, in Stafford, which is kind of in the center of England. A few weeks ago, on the internet, he saw our work, and he saw the arrest warrant issued by the Common Law Court in Brussels against Elizabeth Windsor. He brought it to the attention of his commanding officer. And the commanding officer, who's interesting, in response said that he didn't dispute the evidence. He didn't dispute what he was saying, but he asked Vivian to accompany him to a hospital for a test to make sure that Vivian was, okay. And, chain of command, I guess he felt he had to obey his officer. Yeah. He went along and he got put away. Now he's still in prison there, basically in prison in this mental hospital, St. George's Hospital in Stafford. They've committed him and will not let anyone call him. They've given him a whole series of antipsychotic drugs. And they're criminalizing him because he didn't even advocate anything. He just simply reported it to this captain in the Irish Guards, and he was incarcerated on that basis.
Wow. And have there been any calls coming to them? Are there ITCCS and ICLCJ members and people around the world calling in to get him out? What's been active in that end?
There's been a lot of calls coming in. That's one of the reasons they cut off any phony privileges for Vivian, because he's been in there 3 days, and they've been getting so many calls from people all over England and around the world that they've simply cut off those calls now. Apparently, when you call the front desk of St. George's, they are very irate. They get people to brush off pretty quickly. They know they're under observation now, so that gives him some protection. We know that when prisoners of conscience, and he has been named a prisoner of conscience by the ITCCS. Okay. And people should also know that this Captain Morell, who committed him, has also been getting phone calls. We encourage people to go to the itccs.org website. The latest story, all the details about this case is the latest story up online, dated May 7th.
Yeah, we have the same article on ICLCJ. .com, as well as on we have a fairly lengthy article on radiowarrior.ca and on Exopolitics, the blog blog.com has also a breaking news story concerning Vivian Cunningham. It's important for us to be able to support men and women who are out there. They may not even know what's going on, but it's our job as citizens and to support these people, because the idea of being incarcerated and drugged up, especially when you don't even know what's going on. Also, apparently his child was taken and returned back to Jamaica. Can you confirm that?
That's a rumor we heard. Now, the family in Jamaica has been in touch with us, with the Coventry ITCCS and with myself, and we are trying to set up a direct link with Vivian through his family, who are going to really demand access to him. But no, the fact that they're doing that, and this is not against somebody who was challenging the government, was even going along. He was simply reporting what he found. And on that basis, they lock him away as if to shut up the whole issue. Yeah. So, I mean, this is really horrendous.
Yeah, I know that also a notice was sent out to the Jamaican regiment that he was a part of to get support from his former regiment to send letters of getting him out as well.
Right.
So I hear. Wow. So, tell me what happened in your trip in Spain and France. What kind of activity did you have there that helped support the Common Law Court of Justice in Brussels and your own for information for ITCCS?
Well, as part of the, just to back up a little bit, the case that's going on in Brussels involving global child trafficking has been accumulating amazing testimonies. There have been 8 people who have given their testimony so far in the Common Law Court there. This is involving child trafficking with the present Pope Jorge Bergoglio, Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the head of the Jesuits, Adolfo Pachon. Now, in Holland and in Belgium, we spoke to 2 new witnesses who actually were present when both of these individuals were at the Ninth Circle cult rituals. Now, this Ninth Circle is a child sacrificial cult, and it involves top church officials, including popes. And as following that lead, we were led again to the more eyewitnesses, several of whom were in Spain. And I went down to Barcelona and Madrid and met with these people. And one of them, of course, was one of the first people to give testimony at when the Common Law Court convened on April 7th. And this is the man who was a former civil servant in the Argentine government who sat in on meetings where the present Pope actually planned how to traffic children of political prisoners, how to kidnap them and traffic them. Now, as part of that, we also met a man in Barcelona who was leading a whole movement there. His name's Antonio Barossa, and he was one of 300,000 children who were kidnapped by the Catholic Church between the 1940s and the 80s during the Franco dictatorship.
Wow. The
Catholic Church went in there and stole 300,000 children and trafficked them for between $40,000 and $80,000 each. So they made $20 billion just off that one operation in Spain. They told the parents the kids had died, and then they sold them off in the black market to the highest bidder, basically.
So we have have affidavits, written information, verification that these things actually took place.
Absolutely. We have eyewitnesses that they were children that this happened to. And again, with the connection with the present Pope is that he was sickly involved in the same program in Argentina, showing it's a global, system run by the Catholic Church to do exactly that, to traffic newborns, and for a lot of money. So, this is what we're beginning to pull the cover back on.
Okay. And Alfred, did you have a few points to bring out or questions? Are you there, Alfred?
Yes. Sorry, I had my mute button on.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Yes, Kevin, you had indicated that the Brussels trial had adjourned, but that it was going to resume, and that it might go on for possibly as long as a year. could you give us an idea of when it is going to resume, and what sorts of evidences or what sorts of witnesses will be coming on, and what the general forecast is for the conduct of the trial?
Well, the original plan was there was a 2-week adjournment, and it was supposed to convene again on the 12th, next Monday. There's been another delay in that because, frankly, one of the big efforts with the court has been the training of enforcement officers. And there's a big effort now to, we now have over 90 volunteers around the world who want to do training to become common law peace officers and sheriffs. And so, the court doesn't have a lot of resources, and they can't do a lot of things at once. So they've had to take some of the energy they were putting into the court and put it towards this training program, and they put off for another week the reconvening of the court. Another reason they did that, however, was because of these testimonies that have come forward have led into all sorts of other directions, and they've got their research teams working on following these leads to help the prosecution's case. So, I mean, it's the complexity of the case and the limited resources of the common law court means that it's taking longer than it would in a normal court if it had millions of dollars, right? But it's really a sign of how much there is that's coming out. And, I having met with some of these people, I just am really impressed by the dedication and the courage of these witnesses. I've got on tape more evidence from Toast Nienhaus about the things she couldn't even mention the first time. You find with survivors of these crimes, they're not always able to mention everything right at first. No. But it's astounding stuff, and we're going to have it. The prosecution's agreed that they are going to again release this through an information bulletin, sharing some of this evidence again during May.
Yes, right. Just a couple of follow-up questions on that. Just so that people begin to understand, what are these enforcement officers going to be doing?
Well, there's really 5 jobs, and one of the reasons the court is training the people now is because there are being crime scene investigations that are needed to be mounted by the court. That, for example, some of the mass grave sites mentioned by Toast, there were also grave sites mentioned in Spain. And basically we need competent crime scene investigators to go in there and get more evidence for the prosecution. That's one of the main jobs in the training of these sheriffs and peace officers. They're in touch with forensic specialists. In fact, one of the groups that was active in Bosnia in unearthing mass graves had volunteered to help the court. So there's trained forensic specialists who are going to be going out to assess these sites, to do DNA analysis, on the remains and that kind of thing. But besides the crime scene investigation, the sheriffs are needed to enforce the warrants of the court. There's standing arrest warrants against Elizabeth Windsor, Joseph Ratzinger, and others, Stephen Harper, the Prime Minister of Canada. There's efforts by groups around the world to actually perform citizens' arrests, to occupy these churches, seize the property that was expropriated by the common law decision in the first court case. All of that is needed in order for the court to carry on. So it's really trying to deal with many fronts all at once, and we realize that the enforcement end is very essential, so that this tribunal isn't just a symbolic, statement, but it's actually a court with teeth that can go in and perform the arrests, find more evidence, and that kind of thing.
Right. Now, the other follow-up question is this, that we're asked by many people every day on social media and elsewhere who are following this trial on a day-to-day basis, where they can access this evidence. Some of them, say, wow, these allegations are so amazing. I mean, they have to go through so many paradigm shifts that they want to see it. Others want to follow up. Others want to be able to pass it on to their friends. Where can people really follow this so that they can be able to follow the evidence as it comes out, and or is evidence going to be available? That is, how is the trial being reported to the public?
Well, the trial itself had to be held in camera because of security issues, threats to people in the court and to witnesses. And for example, the first case, the case of that civil servant from Argentina, he had to. He came to Brussels, gave the testimony. He's now back, held incommunicado somewhere for his own safety. So, I mean, that's part of the reason that the court decided to issue these information bulletins. There have been 3 issued, and all people have to do is go back through postings of itccs.org, and you'll see references to these things. But the second case is really a continuation of the first, and the 150 exhibits that were used to prove the case of genocide in Canada by these very same institutions that are on trial now, all of that has been up online for months and at itccs.org, all of that evidence. So, I mean, the evidence is there, and also, on top of that, in the coming months, the prosecution is talking about ways of releasing the evidence in a way that's not going to compromise the case, because the most important thing is the proving of the case, first of all, bringing in a verdict, and then, like I say, the enforcement aspect. So all of that is, making it that this isn't like a normal, as open as we would have liked it. But I think your point about paradigm shift is really important, because we find in the past the problem isn't the evidence. The evidence is out there in the eyewitnesses and the documents, even in forensic evidence. What the problem is that people find it very hard to believe. And what I found is that when people have that problem that they simply can't believe these things are happening, or that these high institutions and popes and others are doing these crimes, they then revert to the psychological defense of, well, it can't be true, let's see evidence. It's kind of like trying to feed somebody with salt water. They're never satisfied, because what they want isn't evidence. They want some affirmation that this can't be true. And that's not to discount everybody's statements, but I find that it's really a question of their worldview quite often, and not evidence per se.
I know that worldwide a lot of people are waking up because information like this is coming out. But is there, after evidence comes out outside, you're mentioning that a lot of the stuff is done in camera because of safety concerns. Now, are these sessions being videotaped? The evidence that is given by this Argentinian, for instance, is it on video, and will it be put out on a court of record, on a website or a platform where people themselves can actually read or listen to or see the evidence as it's supposed to be a public affair? Are these things going to become available so people worldwide can say, yes, this is what's going on at the International Common Law Court of Justice in Brussels, and this is the evidence that's being presented, and we have access to this court of record, so others can possibly say, look, this happened to me, provide more evidence, or also let people within the Catholic Church and other groups become aware of what's actually happening and transpiring?
Well, what's happened is it's really 2 stages. The first stage is doing the court, and security is paramount for that. Now, I don't know the details of who exactly is being videoed and who isn't. I understand that the case of the civil servant from Argentina was so important that absolutely he's on video. But as we did with our first tribunal in Canada in 1998, some of those testimonies were in private, and it was never released to anybody because of the request of the witness and others for their own safety. I don't know the details. The prosecution knows that. But what I do know is the idea of doing it in 2 stages is this. You do the court case first, it's documented, and then there will be a public display of that once the verdict is in. in effect, stage 2 will be, okay, we're going to take all the evidence, we're going to present it in a public way, including in a documentary form. It was strongly recommended by me and others that we actually do a whole documentary film based on the court proceedings. And all of the evidence can then be laid out to the world. But we need the evidence done in a proper way first, presented in the proper way, and done according to due process and the whole bit by the court itself first. Now, they've had to do it in that two-step way because there was, and my understanding is that there was a team set out by the Holy Alliance, by the Jesuit spy agency, to take out members of the court, literally to kill them. And, the same way they did Pope John Paul I, about all of this stuff. So there's also information that I, myself, being targeted while in France. And so, we had to take measures to, in response to that. So all of that makes it frustrating for people, but at the same time, when you look at what we're up against, it's understandable they've decided to do it that way.
Now, Kevin, just picking up on what you said about the paradigm shift and what the what the defendants are doing to prevent this information from coming out, it occurred to me just now to revisit the case of Vivian Cunningham, soldier Vivian Cunningham, who is now been committed for 6 months to a mental hospital just for asking questions. And it seems to me that is a measure taken by the Crown, which is exactly to prevent a paradigm shift. That is that they don't want, and to prevent any. You had stated that the enforcement officers are now being trained to enforce warrants against Elizabeth Windsor. Well, presumably these UK soldiers have taken an oath of loyalty to Elizabeth Windsor and would defend against any attempts to serve the warrants against her. But if the soldiers now are questioning these crimes, well, then the oath of loyalty would be null. And so that's why they want to attempt to inoculate the entire British Army by incarcerating in mental facilities any of the armed forces that are sworn to protect her, precisely against any of the enforcement by court personnel to serve these warrants.
Yeah, well, they're setting an example of them. They're shooting them in plain sight to warn other British soldiers that if you even talk about this issue, you're going to end up in a mental hospital. It's like when they defrocked me, when the United Church did the only public delisting in their history of a minister. It was back in 97 when they got rid of me. It was a message to all the clergy: watch out, this will happen to you. So clearly that's why they're targeting Vivian Cunningham. They're making a public example of them. So in a way, the more we talk about this, that's what they're hoping, that a lot of people are going to get scared over this. And in that sense, I don't think they're going to release him like they did David Compan. I think they're going to definitely make an example of him. But in the broader picture, the reason we issued, and a couple of months ago, the court actually issued stand-down orders to all of the legal agents of the Vatican and the Crown of England. That means every policeman, every soldier, every member of Parliament and judge in England, in Canada, in any Commonwealth country, they were ordered to stand down because they are not allowed under international law to take an oath of allegiance and serve a convicted criminal. So their allegiances are null and void, and the government knows that, the army knows that, and that's why they're making an example to basically scare people so much that they've forgotten common sense, they've forgotten the law, that the emperor clearly has no clothes anymore and no power. And so that's what they're afraid of. Once we get the police and army standing down, they're finished, and they know that.
Yeah, and in the military, when one man gets incarcerated under a psychiatric commitment, everybody knows about it. Everybody.
Right.
Well, do you think taking a page from the scenario that the Vatican pulled when they excuse me, when they had a forced resignation of Ratzinger to bring in, at least an apparent forced resignation of Ratzinger to bring in Bergoglio as kind of the PR frontman, do you think that we're going to find a forced resignation of Elizabeth Windsor, who is the convicted criminal, to bring in, Prince William possibly skipping over, so that he'll be the public face, so that then the monarchy would not have a convicted felon in that office, and then they won't have that danger. Do you think that they'll try and do that play that the Vatican just did?
Yeah, very much. I think that that's in the works. That's why Kate and William have been in the news so much. They were holding them in the wings to do exactly that. But don't forget, it wasn't the individuals per se, it was the institution as a whole that was found guilty. So while you hold executive officers accountable and guilty, the Crown of England as a whole is recognized as a transnational criminal body, the same way the Vatican is. So it doesn't really matter who's at the helm. The institution has been indicted, and it will apply as much to or King William, if you like, or who's ever king or queen next. I don't think it really matters. The point is that they will be found equally guilty and equally arrestable.
Now, one of the remedies that the International Common Law Court of Justice has found in the case of the Vatican is in essence to deinstitutionalize the Vatican, that is, so that it is no longer a state body, or with privileges as a state, with receiving tax exempt status and all these revenues as a state, with the Pope as the head of state. That is, separating all of these functions. What similar remedies have you proposed with the British monarchy?
Well, basically that, take the example in Canada, it's not even a question of will or won't. It has to now be reestablished constitutionally. There is no legitimate government in Canada when its official head of state is a convicted felon, and the institution of the Crown is a criminal organization. There needs to be, and there is developing in Canada, a whole movement to establish a republic. The form it takes has to be determined by people. There's a gathering in Winnipeg in July to try to establish a committee to form a new constitution, to establish a republic in Canada, probably a model of a federated republic where all the different indigenous nations have equal status within the republic, kind of like what Yugoslavia was. Yeah. That's one model being put forward, but that's up to people to develop. We need, in all of the Commonwealth countries now, and in England, people have to take the next political step, which is, yes, there is no lawful authority anymore. We have to recovenant that. We have to establish that. And until then, all bets are off. There are no lawful authorities. That's the really amazing thing about the times we're living in.
Now, you yourself had said that in June you will be accompanied by many dignitaries and public people going back into the United Kingdom, into England. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're going to do the direct approach. We've got a whole film crew standing by. Some politicians and members of the tribunal, some senior members, are going to accompany me. We're going in as a whole party. And we're going to challenge them. If you want to try to arrest us and we want to stop us, you're going to have to do some explaining to the world. It's going to be filmed in real time, live streamed all over the world. And the whole purpose of this is to enforce the warrants of the court publicly. And they will attempt to go to Buckingham Palace, to the various locations, and enforce these warrants. And it'll all be live on television. So this is this is the plan. And that's one of the things we were talking about when I was in Brussels.
Right. Yes, Joshua, do you have any questions at this point?
Yes, I was just wondering about some comments that are being made by the Catholic Church, the UN, and some of the larger multinational corporations. There's a spin going around about the legitimate redistribution of wealth. Have you been hearing some of this information? And if you do, because it's pertinent in the news, I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Well, I'm actually writing a piece about that right now today. For the richest corporation on the planet to talk about other people redistributing their wealth, why don't they just start at home? Now, of course, they won't. If they tried to do that, they would end. Things would end pretty quick. Anyone who tried to do that seriously with the Vatican wealth. But the thing that they're missing, of course, and this is part of their spin and distraction, is the wealth of the Vatican in the trillions of dollars of wealth, property and assets and everything. That's already been forfeited under international law. It's every church property on the planet can lawfully be occupied by people. The assets, the money in the collection plate, everything. It's going towards funding a criminal body, and therefore it's forfeited. So that once people become activated around this with the help of the common law sheriffs and others, they can lawfully start going in and occupying, seizing that church property and wealth. So knowing that, and the Catholic Church knows that that can happen under the law, you're damn right they're going to start to try doing everything possible to distract people and pointing to other people in other directions and posing as a very liberal kind of minded person, which is what Bergoglio is doing now. It's part of the whole distraction, but I think it's an extent of that they would risk causing that kind of, within the Catholic Church, there's a lot of opposition to that. They would risk even offending people in the Church by saying that stuff because of, that their backs are really very much against the wall on this whole issue.
It's very strange to me concerning the redistribution of wealth, because I've been asked so many questions about it. One of the strange things is an awareness of everyone's, this is a comment made by the Pope, said that despite the decrease in poverty, the world's people deserve and expect even greater results, and awareness of everyone's human dignity should encourage everyone to share with complete freedom the goods which God's providence has placed in their hands. Now, are they expecting people to dig into their pockets and give to the church that would be redistributed?
Bingo.
And how does that work? And is it because the Vatican needs extra cash in their pocket, or why is this push? Even the UN is pushing this, and I'm sort of either I'm missing something, or is it sort of like the carbon tax where the planet's really not warming up, but it's a way of getting more money?
Well, it's kind of like, why is the British SAS and the Navy SEALs in America going in to rescue 200 girls in Nigeria? No. When they've stood idly by while thousands are being trafficked every day all over the world. There's obviously another agenda going on, and it's kind of like this term sustainable development, part of Agenda 21, the depopulation program. They mask their purpose behind these pleasant-sounding labels and words. Sustainable development means, you can't have so many mouths to feed, you got to get rid of them. But it sounds like a very liberal, very progressive kind of thing. If you just go by the words. And similarly with this, when they're talking about redistribution of wealth, the first question is, okay, boys, set an example. How about starting to distribute the wealth of the church and, that kind of thing. That, of course, isn't going to happen. But this is, like I say, more fog and mirrors, really.
Okay. You mentioned something, and it's something that a lot of Canadians are asking about, and that's Agenda 21. And how does it apply to what the work that you're doing with ITCCS? A lot of Canadians think that Agenda 21, the Americans are dealing with, that Canada really doesn't have anything to do with it. Can you spell out a little bit about what Agenda 21 really is, and how it was put forth, and why it affects all people that are part of, let's say, the Commonwealth, the Americas, and other countries?
Well, I know Alfred probably has stuff to say about this too, but the 2 cents I'll throw in about that is, it was bandied about. The term was bandied about for decades, since I think in the 1980s at some of the world summits it began to be talked about. I have, kind of firsthand experience of this within among indigenous communities, because documents given to us from somebody within the Assembly of First Nations. Now, this is the government-run government chiefs. who are really acting as the arm of the genocide machine in Canada.
Yeah.
Documents from a conference they did in Calgary in 2003 kept using the word sustainable development as applied to reservations. And what that was is clearly from reading through the double talk, they were saying, the AFN chiefs were saying that we have to get rid of at least half the people on the reservations. We have to cut off their housing, cut off the medical supplies. Now, as a minister in the downtown east side of Vancouver for decades, we see where those people end up. They end up on drugs, they end up homeless, they end up getting wiped out. And that's the whole plan aimed at Indigenous people. You get the Native elites to get rid of their own people, to force them into conditions of poverty and disease and helplessness, and they'll get killed off. They will depopulate further. That's the Agenda 21 program for Indigenous people all over the world at the hands of the collaborating Native elites. And this happens in Canada, happens in any area where there's large Indigenous communities. So that's one example of how they need to use Agenda 21 in that way, basically to get the resources, to get the water and the uranium. You know, if you go into northern Saskatchewan now, there's areas where you're not allowed to go because of the enormous death rate from uranium poisoning on all the Cree reservations. Same thing in the Lakota territory, the Rosebud and Pine Ridge reservations. I'm actually going out there next week to help document some of that. So that's an example within Canada and the United States of how the whole agenda is being pushed.
And the same thing with the Athabasca River, with the tailings of the tar sands, which are so toxic, and that they're bumping right against the river where Native people and the fish are dying it and getting diseases at alarming rates. I know that through Agenda 21, it's almost people have to be aware it's the opposite of what they're saying. When they're talking about combating poverty, it is creating poverty. When they're talking about protecting and promoting human health, it's actually the opposite. But I would really ask listeners to read up on Agenda 21 and see what's going on that end. Now, Could
I just jump in here a second?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. While we're on that subject, and I'm sure that Kevin and you, Joshua, will appreciate this, because there is an ITCCS and Vatican connection to Agenda 21. All of these depopulation policies, world depopulation policies, actually began in the early 1950s when what's called, quote, the Club of Rome was founded. And this was founded by the black monarchies, by the UK monarchy, by the Dutch monarchy, and by their kind of think tanks. And guess where it was founded? In Rome. And guess what is in Rome? The Vatican. So that's how they surfaced it in kind of a technocratic mode, the Club of Rome, in the same way that the Trilateral Commission and all of these other clubs and commissions are kind of surfaced in a technocratic context. But it all traces back to the Vatican, to the Club of Rome. So I just wanted to add that, this fundamental world genocide traces back to the Vatican.
Thank you. I just want to come back to one point here, Kevin. And I know that when you come back home, you'll be working on probably a video series or a tape series that people can follow for the positions that are available for the international common law positions. So you're going to be looking for investigators, people who have experience, for instance, in forensics. You're going to be looking for sheriffs. What are the other 5 positions that you'll be looking for?
Well, we need people to help enforce the warrants, to help organize. The thing to remember, this is a community movement. We need to organize a community to take back these church properties, to take back the wealth. I mean, we've been saying this for years around the whole issue of the residential schools genocide, that Native people need to be reclaiming those spaces. That has happened in some areas of Canada and the U.S. where the Catholic Church has been ordered off the reservation and those buildings have been taken over. Those examples need to be spread. We need to mobilize the community to do that. So it's that. It's also providing security for witnesses in the courts when we do set up these local common law courts. We've got efforts now, especially in the U.S., and England, people are really taking the ball and setting up these common law courts, and that we need protection for the witnesses and the court members in that, and all of that will be provided by the sheriffs and the peace officers. That's why we're training them now over the next few weeks.
Okay, will there be something available on the internet, video-wise or otherwise, that is going to be prepared for the people that are interested? I'm getting emails like crazy saying I'm ready. You know, what's going to happen in the next few months?
Forward all of their inquiries to itccscentral@gmail.com. itccscentral@gmail.com, because that's the central body that farms out. It kind of coordinates all the different groups. So, for example, people in one area will be connected with each other. They'll be given the training material, and they'll be liaisoning with me and people who I work with to make sure those things happen.
Okay. What are your next steps? What are your next steps in the next couple of months with your plans? Also, I think you have that walk you're doing in June. When is that happening?
You mean going in England, or?
Yeah, well, I think you mentioned, I'm sorry, I forget, but there was a notice going out that for people to do a walk on June?
No, that's a fellow, he's walking from Glasgow down to Brussels or something. It's that was something else, doing a whole thing on child trafficking in England. But no, it's basically my job now is to be helping set up these local training programs and the common law courts that are being established, and leading towards the action, of course, in July as well. So, I'll be out and about all over doing that.
Right. What's the people in Coventry, the Coventry Common Law Court?
What about them? Sorry,
did you meet with them?
No, I didn't go into England this time. It was decided I was all ready to go, and one of the things I was severely I don't know if they chastised me, but they said, look, you can't do that. You can't operate on your own. You need a team around you. Mm-hmm. And they said in no uncertain terms, we've got to have a whole group intervening in a place like England. It's just like Rome. In London and Rome, they're powers unto themselves, and they have no qualms about locking people away for years. So you need a whole different way of operating there. And, so they said for that reason, we have to have more protection around you and the people you work with.
And before you came to the United States, what happened to you in Ireland?
Well, it was interesting. I made a hotel reservation in Dublin, and nobody could have known about that because it was simply done on the computer. And when I got there, there was a fellow waiting right outside the hotel, and he said, "Kevin, are you Kevin?" And I didn't say anything, and he began to babble on about stuff almost like he'd been briefed about it. Not like he had a knowledge of it, but he had just been briefed. And he said, "There's some people who you've got to meet. Come on down this alley." And he had me by the arm, right? And I basically talked my way out of it and said, well, let me go check in here in a minute. I've just got to check into the hotel. There was a group waiting outside when I looked out. They were ready to swarm me and take me away somewhere. So I made a few calls. We got the Garda, the Irish police. I just basically said I was being assaulted. The police showed up, and at that point, these guys took off. But, it was interesting because who could have known about that except somebody who had read my computer? Because nobody else knew except what was on the computer, right?
I know that within the organization of IITCCS and ICLCJ, there's been massive computer and internet, and we keep moving forward in those areas, but it can be taxing.
Well, we're definitely under assault, and that's why the court had to take these measures. And it's also an indication of, it's like I found with the churches in Canada, it's how they react. Like, Sun Tzu in The Art of War says you've got to provoke the enemy to learn about them, to see how they respond. They are very worried about Ireland. Just like the churches in Canada were very worried as soon as we started talking about mass graves of kids, because they knew that, yes, there are those mass graves there. We don't want that looked at. In Ireland, there's something, they're very worried about us doing work there, and they've gone out of their way to subvert the groups that are working there with us, to start the, divide and conquer and rumor mill and all that stuff over there. So that's, by their actions, they're telling us something. And that's the only place well, there was an incident in France too, but basically, whenever I go to Ireland now, those kinds of things start happening, and so I think that tells us something.
Yeah. Any last words or questions, Alfred?
Well, yes. Could you just mention again what the July event is?
What it is between June 29th, which is a Sunday, and July 6th, which is the next Sunday, there is going to be, first of all, there will be a delegation of us going right to London. And we're going to be holding a press conference. We're going to be holding actions to attempt to enforce the arrest warrant against
right, good. Yeah.
There's also going to be supportive actions, church occupations, other things happening in the 10 countries right now where there's sheriffs being actively trained. And that includes Canada and the United States. So that's a week that we're really urging people, and on those two Sundays, June 29th and July 6th, to start doing the church occupations again, start enforcing the warrants, posting the stand-down orders to the church and police officers and others. There's a whole bunch of stuff we're going to be having up online soon, about all that stuff.
Okay. All right. Well,
yes,
thank you.
And again, if people want more information as to how to sign up to become investigators, sheriffs, to enforce the warrants, to begin to serve against church properties and other things, to find out where the training sessions are, where can they go and where can they find more information?
They can write to the central office in Brussels. It's itccscentral@gmail.com. There's also guidance on the itccs.org site. Also, if people you know personally, you can direct them to me because I'm right on the front lines of organizing that stuff. But one of the things I'm finding is we can't rely on emails because they often go astray. So what I would suggest is that the best guarantee for this is simply leave messages as well. I'll leave the number in America that I'm at, this phone number, because this is also a way for people to get through. It's 386-323-5774. So that's 386-323-5774. Just say that you want to leave a message for Kevin and leave all the evidence there. So that way we're not totally reliant on the email system.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to do one more last plug for Vivian Cunningham, a soldier that's been incarcerated for 6 months in the UK. If people would stand up and start to contact either executive of South Stafford and Suffolkshire Healthcare or St. George's Hospital, if you on .org or iclcj.com, politicsblogs.com, you'll find information to contact different people, because it's important that we, even if they're just asking questions, that we stand up for others that are being ill-fated concerning these global actions. Any last words?
No, you said it all right there, brother. Thank you, Joshua, and thanks, Alfred. I'm glad we're carrying this on the way we do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you
Excellent.
very much.
Thank you.